You all. I see some of you anyway. Nice to see. Hi, Erica. How are you doing?
Hi. I'm great. Need a haircut.
What?
Need a haircut. That's
I
happening
need a haircut, or you need a
Wednesday.
haircut?
I need a haircut.
I never need a haircut.
Well, maybe that's what I should do.
I'm so past haircuts. Haircuts are a thing of the past.
Oh, gosh. It's great seeing you.
And you. So, here we are. Ganat?
Yes, you're on, Bill.
Okay,
Thank you so
good.
much for joining us. Go
Okay,
ahead.
fantastic. Well, thank you for inviting me. What I'm going to do this morning, and we'll see how this goes, I want to do a presentation first. I would rather that you didn't interrupt me while I'm doing that, but if it's something really urgent, if you really don't understand something, please let Ganat know on the chat line. But I will leave time at the end so that we can have some more discussion. So I want to lay out a format first, and the main points that I want to talk about really have to do with our relationship, particularly in terms of macrobiotics, with the growing environmental movement and with environmentalism overall. Over the past 15 years, particularly, there has been more and more interest and information and concern about the relationship between the environment and our health, right? And this is something that was there in the environmental movement all the way back into the 1950s and 60s in terms of what was then called deep ecology. And one of the things that I have always felt is that macrobiotics really is a very significant part of deep ecology, which means that our ideas and our vision about how nature works is something that we take into ourselves. It's something that we reflect in our behaviors. It's reflected in the food that we eat. It's reflected in the way that we live our lives, the way that we consume goods, and what kind of things we use in our life. So that ecology is not something that is distant from us. It's something that's intimate to us. And macrobiotics has a very unique possibility here in terms of communicating what we believe to the general public. And the reason I say that is because everything that we do in macrobiotics is really about our relationship with nature. We may use words like infinity or however we want to work it, but the way that infinity speaks to us is through the natural world, right? Everything that we do is based on cycles. It's based on the cycles of the season. It's based on the way that plants grow. It's based on plant morphology, the relationship between the way something looks in nature and the effect that it has, the connection between soil and nutrition, and the whole environment that we live in, the mental and emotional and physical environment, and the way that that impacts our individual health. So all of those things are there within macrobiotics and within macrobiotic theory, and hopefully within macrobiotic practice. And I think that this provides us with an opportunity to bring that kind of unique perspective, which is available there in macrobiotics, to some of the very important cultural conversations that are going on at this time. Right now, I'm hearing a conversation. Is it a conversation that I should be hearing, or is it just a conversation that's going on randomly somewhere? Okay, so the thing that draws our attention right now is the whole issue around the coronavirus. And that has created a huge, very dramatic impact on society all over the world. Whether you think that the drama around that is justified or not, that's something that maybe we can talk about later. But nonetheless, it has affected the way that the world is being run. And one of the things that we lose in the drama of that is the fact that really, and don't get me wrong here, but it's a rather small issue compared with the environmental issues that we're facing, which really have to do with the death of all humanity, right? You know, so every year people die of heart disease, cancer, et cetera, and we don't hear about that. We don't talk about that very much. But when we compare that with the influence of influenza of any kind, and the COVID-19 virus is an influenza, right? When we compare it with any other kind of illness, the results of that in terms of human mortality, and even in the debilitating factors of the disease itself, are really rather small. Right? Now, I don't want to dismiss that, because any kind of illness is important, and any kind of disease is, of course, a huge burden on families and individuals and societies as a whole. But I think if we don't have perspective on this, we can't approach it intelligently. And one thing that I feel very much, and that is that governments around the world have not approached this intelligently. The only government that really got a handle on it was New Zealand. Right? And they took steps which we might not have recommended, but they did get a handle on it. We'll see what happens down the line. They managed to just completely cut it off, but they're in a unique situation. They're an island, and they could really just cut everything off, isolate themselves, and take care of the people who were already exposed to the disease. So the planet is in crisis, and that crisis includes COVID-19, but is not limited to it. And one of the things that has interested me is that we get very emotional about this dis-ease, and we do that because it's invisible, right? You know, we're always frightened of the invisible, right? No matter what form it takes. If it's invisible, so we live in a world that is inhabited by invisible forces that we don't understand. And when that happens, what we do is we look for other people to explain those invisible forces to us. I don't care whether it's a bacteria or a virus or whatever. It's either God causes it, or the government causes it, or mad scientists somewhere cause it, or the position of the stars cause it, whatever, right? It's always something that's outside of our control. And one of the things which macrobiotics, I think, teaches us is that our first response always should be to take things back into our own control, to use our own innate judgment about how to respond to an issue. Well, the big issue that we're responding to now is the death of planet Earth. And that death of planet Earth is pretty serious, I would think. I don't know how many of you agree with that, but it's pretty damn serious. That means everybody's gone. It doesn't mean it's just a crisis and we wait for the government to respond. It means if that takes place, and this is a very unique situation, because this is the first time in the history of the planet where one species has been able to bring the whole planet to extinction. You see, this has happened 5 times before. The geologists tell us that there have been 5 major extinctions, and those were always caused by earthquakes or meteors or something really outside of our control. Well, this one isn't outside our control. This is a result of human activity, not only human activity, but human stupidity, right? When we get right down to it, we're talking about a stupid response to the world around us. Yeah, we're stupid people, right? There's no question about that. we have a lot to answer for. So that's just context. And then there's the context that comes around COVID-19 and this pandemic. And there's a few things that I suggest that we think about, and we'll talk about these to various degrees. One is that we don't have a really deep understanding of all disease, and in relationship particularly to the environment. We do this with all other animals, by the way. When we study any other animal, what we do is we look at the relationship between that animal and the environment that it lives in. That includes the food that it eats, that includes its physical environment, that includes it's a spatial relationship with other species, all of that. When we talk about human beings, that's kind of one of the last things we talk about. One of the last things. We don't have an environmental perspective. And this is very, very interesting when we start talking about viruses, because, you know, we swim in a sea of virus and bacteria and microorganisms. We swim in it. The air, the water, the soil, everything around us is swarming with life. And sometimes people get uncomfortable with that reality, but you don't want to know what lives in your nose. Right? You know, I mean, we have microorganisms that live on the surface of our body, in the interior of our body, all over. We are built of microorganisms. It's their planet, not ours. We're the impingers on the territory here. They actually own it, and they have owned it since the beginning of life on the planet. They were beginning of life on the planet, depending on however you conceive of Genesis on the planet, or evolution on the planet appearing, but it's their show, right? We just happen to show up, and we are a product of them. So when we have a problem with a bacteria or a virus, one of the first things we should do is we should reflect on our own activity. Why are we creating an environment where we are attracting particular kinds of microbiotic life to us? And why are we not able to handle it? And the history of humanity, the health history of humanity, is rife with examples of how we have mistreated ourselves and our environment, and the environment has created a negative feedback loop to us, and the response is always a pandemic. Always. I don't care whether it's the Black Plague or whether it's the swine flu or whatever it is. Every time we create an abusive environment, what happens is it feeds back to us. And when it feeds back to us, what we try to do is we try to control the symptoms of that feedback. But we don't go upstream. We don't say, whoa, what is going on here? Now, we did in a number of occasions. We discovered, for instance, that you can't have raw sewage in the streets. That produces a terrible environment. And in that environment, people get sick. You know, we realize that you can't leave garbage all over the place, because otherwise you get plagues of rats, and they don't have any predators, and so they spread a plague. We discovered these things over time. But the more clever we get in terms of manipulating our own body, our own biology with pharmaceuticals, right, the more we put that on the back burner. We don't really look at things in terms of public health. We look at it as something that's to be conquered. And so this is why we create the language of warfare when we talk about disease. One of the first things that happened with the coronavirus is that both Donald Trump and Boris Johnson declared war on the coronavirus. Well, I mean, what a giggle that is. I'm sure the coronavirus was just terrified, right? To know that there was war being waged upon it by those two dummies. Right? You know, I mean, this is bizarre, but it's a very clear example of the way we think. We think it's out there. The problem is out there when the problem is right here, right? And this is what macrobiotics is all about. And that's what George Osawa was saying this in the 1930s, for goodness sakes, in the 1940s and 1950s. Micho was talking about this in the 1960s and the 1970s. And we keep forgetting that it's our responsibility, right? Whatever happens to us is our responsibility. There's no accidents. Well, that's actually not true. I believe there are accidents, but in terms of where we look, our first inquiry should be an inquiry into ourselves. Right? So all of these microorganisms that we swim in, the bacteria, the archaea, the protozoa, the algae, the fungi, the viruses, that's what creates the earth, and we live within that. In our own gut, there's over 1,000 species of microorganisms growing. And if we're lucky, and if we have taken care of ourselves, those species will all be commensal. In other words, they will live their own life and they will contribute to our life. If not, if we create an environment that's not conducive to those, what will happen is we will create parasitic relationships in that community. So that community of microorganisms become parasitic. And here's the kicker. The kicker is that that is where the immune system is born, is in the gut. That's where it comes from. And the whole issue with virus or any other kind of inflammation has to do with the health of the immune system. Now, this used to be a very radical statement. And macrobiotic people were criticized for saying that that inflammation was the most common problem that people had, but now that's fairly recognized medically. Just about every problem you can think of is characterized by inflammation. And so what controls inflammation? Well, the immune system controls inflammation. What causes inflammation? Well, usually if you don't have the environment that is supportive of the health of the immune system, then it starts to break down. And I want to talk about that a little later on, because some of the symptoms of this disease and the way that it manifests itself really show that to be true. So we have to put on the magic eyeglasses here. And one of the aspects of Osawa's magic eyeglasses was picked up by Michio Kushi and created into what he called the spiral of history. And it's something that is not really discussed a lot in macrobiotics. We're more interested in the latest tea, or whether our salt is coming from the right place or not, but the spiral of history is really important, right? Because what was being said in the spiral of history was applying Osawa's theories of spiralic motion. Kushi said that what's happening is that history is contracting in on itself. And as it contracts in, certain things happen. They happen in the natural world, and they happen very profoundly in human society, because we are the most influential, or we think we are, the most influential creature on the planet right now. So what happens in human society is reflected in the way that we treat the world. One of the things that happens here in that concentration of population is overpopulation. So we've seen this happening over the last decades. It's something that in liberal societies is usually shunned as a conversation, because people automatically think the knee-jerk reaction is that people are talking about, well, let's reduce the population. That's not what it's about. It's just acknowledging a fact. There's a load of people on the planet right now. We're creeping up toward 8 billion people. That's doubling the number of people that lived on the planet in the 1960s. And most people on this call remember the 1960s. There was lots more space then. Now we've just got everybody closed in. And when people close in like that, certain phenomena take place. Many years ago, I had the opportunity to meet a very famous architect by the name of Paolo Solari. He was a very visionary architect. Some of you may be familiar with the city that he started building out in the Mexican desert called Arcosante. And in our conversation with him, he started talking about the way that the human beings had misplanned all the cities that they built. When you come up from the Middle Ages forward, every city is planned to compress people into smaller and smaller spaces, and no exposure to nature. And when this happens in the animal kingdom, we know what happens. The animals start fighting each other. They also become sick, and they also spread disease more easily. Any of you that have ever had children know that a play school is the most dangerous place for a young child, when they go in, they start socializing with other kids, particularly toddlers, and they're wiping their noses and, wiping them on each other. And it's a petri dish, right? For infection. So this is what happens with human beings. It also entails, and Kushi didn't talk about this, but I will talk about this, and that's a concentration of animals. What happens is that the animal populations become compressed as well. Now, the most animal populations on Earth right now, outweighing every other species of animal, are animals that we raise to kill. So it's chickens and cows and pigs and, you name it, they're all out there. These are animals that we raise. That is the biggest proportion of the biomass right now. So human beings and animals that are created for human beings now create the majority of the biomass. Right? This is fun. This never happened before. Never, ever, ever happened before. And this is a nightmare from a health point of view and an ecological point of view. Because when you get lots of human beings together, it's the same as getting lots of animals together. And that is that you create an opportunity for pathogens to really grow and mutate very quickly. And this is particularly true in the case of animals, when you breed the animals to all be the same. So if you're breeding chickens so that they grow so quickly that they don't have legs anymore, that they can't stand up, then what happens is that when a virus gets in that community of chickens, it doesn't have to mutate or adapt at all. It can split from chicken to chicken to chicken to chicken, and it diminishes the virus's need to mutate. And the need to mutate is very important, just as it is in the human population. If you have people that have a strong immune response to a virus, and that virus starts to spread, it will be slowed down if there's a variety of different immune responses. If everybody's exactly the same, right, then the virus doesn't need to mutate, and so it stays the same and it just strengthens. It gets stronger and stronger and stronger. This is why sometimes you see a racial disparity in viral infections. You'll see that maybe people that are Asian have more susceptibility, or people who are Africans have a more susceptibility because they are of a particular genetic type. And when the virus has been spreading among a different racial type, and then it hits a different racial type, the results are very dramatic and oftentimes really terrible. This is what happened when Europeans brought all their viruses to the Americas. So Native American populations and South American populations were very vulnerable to things like smallpox because they'd never encountered it before. So this was a new terrain for the virus to invade, and they had no viral memory of this, whereas Europeans had been dealing with this virus for centuries, right? And so there was a higher ability to handle it. It was part of our cellular memory. So the concentration of animals and closer contact between humans and animals, right? 55% of the world's population now lives in cities. This has never happened before. 55%. The United Nations says that probably by the year 2050, there will be 65% of the world's population living in cities. Again, we have a petri dish, right? We have such intense contact between people that when a virus or any kind of bacterial infection starts spreading, it can spread very, very quickly because of the intensity of contact. This is one of the reasons, the knowledge of this is one of the reasons, poorly explained, why the World Health Organization and other health bodies suggested that people isolate. Because if you just let people out in the street, everybody's going to get the virus. Right? Now, we can talk about the percentage of people where that's actually a problem later, but the truth is everybody will get the virus eventually, particularly when you have one where there's no symptomatic way to control the disease. So the spiral of history, I think, is very instructive for macrobiotic people to think about, because we are close to the rabbit hole. You know, the rabbit hole where, as Micho said, everything starts to change from yang to yin. Right? So everything scripts down. We experience all of these things, one of which is the increased generation of heat, right? You know, so we need more and more power, we need more and more electricity, we need to burn more and more fuel. And then when you get down to that rabbit hole, then Micho optimistically said, then everything becomes spiritualized. Right? You know, it becomes spiritual. We can talk about that, but one thing that I asked Micho one time was, what about if everything explodes? That's very spiritual too, you know? Everything's gone in a moment. Everything instantly spiritualized, right? And he kind of did one of his, yes, maybe so, right? You know, because an atomic bomb would do that. So that's one model that we need to bring into the conversation. Another model is the fundamental model of the rules of ecology, which are very, very macrobiotic as far as I'm concerned. These were presented by Barry Commoner way back before the first Earth Day. So this is like 60 years ago. And the rules of ecology are very simple. There's 4 of them. One of them is that everything's connected. That we're familiar with from a conceptual point of view. But when we take that down to a practical view, what does that mean? That means that everything about this virus, for instance, or anything that happens, is connected to everything. Right? So you can't isolate things off and treat them symptomatically. This was one of the main messages of Osawa, and it was one of the main messages of most spiritual leaders in the world, and most of the more advanced philosophers in the world. Everything's connected. The second thing is that everything goes somewhere. You can't throw anything away. People say, oh, I threw it away, right? Well, there is no away. Everything goes somewhere. You know, I don't know how many of you have ever been to a big garbage dump, but it's incredible, right? I mean, you can't imagine. I mean, how do people create this much garbage, right? Since this whole lockdown has happened in the UK, Marlene and I, who usually don't order things online, have of course been forced to order some things online, because we don't live in a place where there's like a Whole Foods down the corner or this and that. So we've had to order food in or order products in sometimes. And we've been amazed at the packaging that we've had to deal with. We thought, oh my God, that bin that the recycling says this is for your packaging, that's never full, right? We've had to puck it down and jump on it several times, just because there's so much junk. We're thinking, oh my God, look at this. But it all goes somewhere. Nature knows best is number 3. Nature knows best. Nature will always find a solution. We don't like those solutions. Now, what does this mean in terms of the present viral infection? Well, if we wanted to use that, we could use it for a lot of other illnesses too. But one of the things is that nature knows that when there's too many people or too many of any creature together, it invents ways of winnowing out the excess. I know that a lot of people don't like that when they hear that, but that's what nature does. Nature does this over and over and over again. If there is an environmental imbalance, nature will always try to correct it. Now, I'm not talking about this being a conscious effort on the part of any entity. I'm just saying that that's part of natural process. You know, if a river has too much water in it, what nature will do is it will start to meander it. Right? You know, if one particular species of animals overpopulates, nature will find a way to improve the procreation of predators. Right? You know, this is a natural process. Right? And so when we look at something that is anything that's killing people, for human beings, we got to say, well, wow, what's going on here? What's nature telling us about this? Right? So, and the last one is one of my favorites, and that is that in nature, there's no free lunch. This is the law of karma. You don't get to do things and then walk away. Right? No, whatever you do comes back to you. If you do something really good, it should come back to you. If you do something that's crazy, it should come back to you. Right? So this is the law of karma. Right? No free lunch. Well, we've been living on free lunch for a long time, or the illusion of free lunch for a long time. And now we're faced with a situation where we have to adjust and adapt our behavior. We have to adjust and adapt our behavior. And a lot of people don't like that. Look at, living here in the United Kingdom is a little different than living in the States. But I watch things, because I'm an American, right? I watch all the American news, and I watch things on there, and I think, like, you know, people were protesting being in their house on lockdown, whatever you think about the lockdown thing, but the things they were protesting most about were haircuts and hamburgers, right? You know, people were saying, I can't get a haircut. You know, I think, for Christ's sakes, you're talking about something that's, you know, endangering you, endangering society, and you're worried about what your hair is looking like, you know, or you're wondering whether you can't go out and get a McDonald's. Right? You know, this is the height of insanity, but it shows something really important, and that is that we don't like to change. We don't like to change. So I'm looking at the clock, and I see I have to speed up a little bit. So a couple of things here about the origin specifically of the coronavirus. All viruses that are harmful to humans have begun in animals. They're all zoonoses, all of them. All of the influenzas are zoonoses. They come from pigs, swine flu. They come from birds, bird flu. They come from COVID-19, which came from animals. And we don't know which one first, by the way, right? It was very dramatic for them to say people eating bats, but we don't know that at all whether it came from bats. We know that it's in bats, but that would be like saying Lyme disease is a result of deer. It's not a result of deer, it's a result of mice. Right? And the fleas live on the mice, and then they jump to the deers, and then it's contact with the deers that creates the problem. And the only reason that the mice are there in the first place, overpopulating, is because we killed all the wolves and foxes. Because if there were wolves and foxes there, they would have killed the mice. They would have kept the population in check, and that's why nature knows best. So we know that this particular disease came from animals. And one of the things that I thought was very interesting was the way people responded to this, first of all, was by getting very, very angry about the fact that Chinese people ate other animals other than the ones that we're used to eating. I mean, you can only eat certain animals. Come on, a cow. Yeah, you can eat a cow. You can't eat a civet cat, for God's sakes, right? They're cute, right? You can't eat a dog, right? But you can eat a sheep, right? Now, since I moved to Europe, I've encountered many sheep, and I'll tell you, sheep are just as cute as dogs. And they like to play and jump around, and they do sort of things, and you could train them, right? You could train them. Pigs, you can train them. So they all start in the animal kingdom, and they jump over. And the reason that they are so prolific in the animal kingdom is because they're sick. All of the animals that we raise to eat are sick animals. That's why 80% of all the antibiotics in the world are used for animals, not for human beings, right? Because they're sick. So eating sick cows, eating sick sheep, eating sick chickens, right? We seem to like that. Pathogens spread very easily in sick populations. So among COVID-19, a couple of things that showed up, which I think are interesting. One is that among children, and there was a request that I mentioned children, and I'm sure that other macrobiotic counselors that are on will talk about that. But one of the interesting things was that it created in adults and children a cytokinesis, which is like a storm in the immune system. And if you look at the immune system, the immune system, when the immune system is suffering from multiple challenges, what happens is that it panics. This is very, very common. And so there's so many different kinds of infections working in the body. So if you have heart disease and you also have diabetes, if you're obese and you also have diabetes, or you have circulatory problems, or you have cancer, or whatever, the immune system actually jumps into a state of panic, and you get what is called a storm. And this storm means that the immune system starts producing more and more inflammation in the body. And that's when people start dying. And so when you look at the people who die from coronavirus, which is a very small percentage, realistically, it's not too much out of line from the rest. You see that there are indicators there that people are going to have problems. One of them is that they have multiple organ dysfunctions. If a person goes into the hospital and they have heart disease and pancreatic problems, or they have cancer and they have a respiratory dysfunction, those are the ones that are more apt to die. If they're obese, the numbers go through the roof, right through the roof. Right? So these two things right there should tell us, who are dying? The people who are dying from this are, generally speaking, people who are already desperately ill. That's why they're dying. The virus is almost secondary. The fact that they get the virus is a secondary thing. And so influenza or respiratory problems, pneumonia, is one of the most common causes of death from a variety of different kinds of illnesses. People say, well, they died of pneumonia. Well, they die of pneumonia. Look at the people that were dying of the AIDS epidemic in the 1970s and 80s. What was the cause of death? The cause of death was pneumonia, right? That's just an indication, So, and that was, again, a viral infection, right? So those are, and age, of course. Why age? Well, age for two reasons, particularly in the developed countries in the world. One is that most people who are my age, like 78 years old, right? 78-year-olds are usually taking multiple medications. And among those medications are generally statins, right? And if you're taking statins on a regular basis for your heart, right, you're prime victim for viral infection. Your circulatory system can go into immune response very, very quickly. Right? Children, this was brought up before with children in Kawasaki disease. Kawasaki disease is a very rare disease, and the children that got AIDS, that were infected with coronavirus, some of them presented symptoms that were like Kawasaki disease. And Kawasaki disease is characterized by fever and red eyes and red rash and swelling, and the feet swell up oftentimes. This is a very small portion of people. And again, what causes this is an immune system storm, a cytokinesis, that boom, all of a sudden the immune system gets overwhelmed and it just goes crazy, and it starts releasing proteins that draw the immune response to the body. And this is where we end up with it. So is it unique for children? Well, it is, because a few children, but it's very difficult to get good facts on the children that are being presenting with these symptoms. We don't know what percentage of those children were obese, for instance. We don't know that, right? We don't know what percentage of those children had other health issues, particular respiratory problems. How many of those children were asthmatics? One thing that we do know is that areas where air pollution was highest was where COVID-19 became more serious for people, which makes sense, right? It's also interesting to note that the sense of smell was one of the strange symptoms that showed up with COVID-19. And of course, those of you who study macrobiotics know that that's associated with respiratory issues. All of a sudden you lose your sense of smell. You lose your sense of taste, which is associated with stomach and spleen, which is the immune system, right? So when those kind of symptoms shows up in a macrobiotic population, there should have been an immediate response to that in terms of take care of your gut, stop binging, right? don't go crazy with the sweet stuff. No, it's very simple. One of the problems with macrobiotics is it's too simple. And we've tried to make it complicated. We really have. We've outdone ourselves, right? We've outdone ourselves with 150 different kinds of therapeutic drinks and a special cooking technique. And if you stir the pot to the left rather than the right and all of that stuff, we try to complicate it. But, at base, it's really, really simple. Keep your gut healthy and the rest of the body will take care of itself. Now, I think, Ganat, where are you? Have I just ran out of time? I can't hear you at all. I just see your lips moving.
I'm saying that it's terrific. Keep going.
Okay, good. So I think this is this is probably a good place for us to have some questions. Some talk. Okay, I actually see the chat thing down here. Blah blah blah. Maybe. Oh, these were all suggestions to me to restart my computer.
Oh yeah, forget about that. One is asking about overpopulation in China and India, and if there has been natural winnowing there.
Well, two things. One is that in many countries, including America and including the UK, it is really the political powers to be really disguise oftentimes the kind of statistics about deaths. The Chinese and the Indians both are very, very sensitive about this. So they don't want to be telling the world that they have a higher death rate than other nations. And so it's pretty difficult to know. But one thing to counteract that is that they're very disciplined societies, oftentimes under the boot, but they're disciplined. So if the government says stay at home, they don't worry about their haircut. They stay at home, right? They do it, and there's been a lot of silliness around wearing masks, but masks are there to protect other people, not to protect the person wearing the mask. And so people in the Orient are very, very used to the government telling them to wear masks, and they do wear masks, and they manage to keep the transmission of the disease down. So all of this nonsense about, it'll get through a cotton, it's not getting through. It's like when you cough or sneeze and you've got a mask on, it contains the liquid that the virus is in, the fluid that the virus is in, or the aerosol. So you're just recontaminating yourself. You're not recontaminating anybody else. So, but in those countries, they were, they know that. This is very difficult because it gets into a political realm here with death counts. In the UK, for instance, I know that there's been several people who have suggested that the death count has been kept low, and other people who have suggested that the death count is made artificially high. I just read something the other day where there was questions about the Florida death count, that there were all of a sudden there were a lot of deaths being listed with influenza, when in many parts of the country, if someone is diagnosed with COVID, it's listed as a COVID death, whereas if somebody has pneumonia, for instance, and that's the cause of death, they don't list the COVID. And so it's just a game. The whole thing about population concentration and medical statistics. Governments are corrupt. All governments are corrupt fairly equally, right? They're making balance with each other, right? And so, you just can't trust information that comes out about the impact of anything, which could make anybody look bad. If the impact is going to make somebody look bad, some politician, then the chances are that the figures are going to be manipulated. You know, and you don't know about that until years afterwards when they start going over the statistics and look at it, you know.
Then there's another question by yours truly about accidents. Is there such a thing?
About what?
Accidents. Are there
Accidents?
accidents? Yeah.
Well, yeah, you know, maybe it's self-serving, but I do feel that you can't be in a situation where you're all-knowing all the time. You know, if you say there's no accidents, the assumption there is that you are sensitive to everything that's happening around you. So if an airplane falls out of the sky, right, and hits you, and people say, well, it's because he was eating too much kombu, you know, I don't think that's really a fair jump to make, you know, and I see this used oftentimes in macrobiotics as it's just kind of silly to me. I mean, there's things that are in our control and there's other things that aren't in our control. And not everything is in our control. So yeah, I think there are accidents. And I suppose some people would say, well, it's because, you know, Pluto was conjuncting Mars or something. You know, but that doesn't hold any weight with me. I'm really only interested in things that I can have some effect on. If something's outside my zone of effectiveness, it's interesting, but certainly not something I would, you know, build my thinking around. Right? Is that it?
Yeah.
Somebody said, questions? Why do you think macrobiotics is too simple? I think it's too simple because the conclusions, when something is really simple, the conclusions and the actions to be taken are simple. Okay? So if everything that I just said, one of the first things I would say is, if we want to stop these viruses, stop eating animals. Stop it right now. There's no reason to not. Stop it. And that includes fish, right? Stop eating all of it. Stop eating it. Nature can't support that. Now, if it ever could, it can't now, right? So stop it. We know enough now that there's no problems you're going to have nutritionally if you eat a diverse diet without animal food in it, no problem at all. So stop it. Second thing, be aware of what you're buying. You know, don't buy a lot of useless crap. You know, we live on useless crap. Right? You know, I put out a little video the other day, and you know, the fashion industry results in 10% of global warming gases come from the fashion industry. That's more than international flights. That's how much. And that doesn't include the water pollution that's generated, which is huge because all of these dyes that are used, dye in this stuff. It's a nice shirt, but you know, it's my last shirt, right? So, you know, there are things like that we have to pay attention to with the food that we eat. You know, a lot of the food that people eat on a regular basis, and even some that probably macrobiotic people do too, as I learn more about it, some of the foods that we eat are a result of slavery. There's still a lot of slaves in the world. Right? I'm not talking about people that are living on low wages. I'm talking about people that are literal slaves. So here in Europe, if you eat salad and that salad comes from Spain, it's probably a production of slaves who are African people who are held in bondage in southern Spain in these hundreds of acres of greenhouses that are down there, Altera, down in the southern part of Spain, near Gibraltar, down in that area. You can drive by. It takes you 45 minutes to drive by the greenhouses, and they extend back into the mountains for miles and miles. You know, and there's mostly slaves there. If you eat shrimp, people like shrimp, right? Eat shrimp. Most of the shrimp, like at Costco and Walmart and all of those places, if you eat shrimp from those places, very lovely, very cheap, because they're farmed by people who are chained to the boats in Indonesia, right? They're chained to the boats. If you like bananas and you don't use free trade, you just buy the bananas in the store. They're almost all grown by people who are in economic slavery. They can't grow their own food. They work in plantations where the sprays overhead burn their skin, make the men impotent. You know, so there's awareness that we have to have about how the world works. and everything that we do in our life contributes to that. There really isn't a gray zone. Right? We're either contributing to the pollution of the planet and the ill health of the planet and the ill health of our society, or we're not, right? And we're all we have to be moving in that direction. It's the movement that's really important. So that's
So
it.
are you optimistic? Are you optimistic then?
Well, I'm optimistic in the sense that to be pessimistic, I would just cut my throat. But it's not a valid place for me to be. But when I look at what's happening and I look at the quality of the thinking that's going on and the feeling that's going on, there's some very fundamental things here that are going to be very difficult to change. One of them is anthropocentrism. We still think that life on the planet Earth is like this. It's like a pyramid, and human beings sit up here at the top. And we have dominion, to misquote the Bible, right? We have dominion over all life on Earth, right? Well, that hasn't worked out well, right? Like we judge how we interrelate to the planet depending on how it benefits us, right? When politicians talk about the environment and how they usually talk about the economy. Oh, well, we can't do that because the economy wouldn't stand for. What's the basis of the economy? The basis of the economy is the environment. It's food, it's mining, it's logging. So instead of looking at the world like this, we have to look at it like this. We're just one of the creatures on the planet. And until we make that pop, right, things are going to keep going slow, and that's not good. And the emotions that are involved in that are really difficult too. Mostly fear and greed. The greed is a result of the fear. We're afraid we won't get our cookies. Somebody else is going to get them before us. Or there's always going to be somebody else that's getting more cookies than we're getting. And so we play these stupid games when. Something interesting that I had an occasion to observe when I was young, when I was about 12 years old. The town that I lived in California, was a sleepy little town. A nice little town on the ocean, and summertime tourist town, and not a whole lot of industry or anything. But one winter, the town flooded. The whole downtown area was underwater. The parking meters were just, the tops of the parking meters were just sticking up out of the water, and it was, for me, as a young boy, it was a great adventure. My dad and I went in a rowboat down the main street of town, and I thought this was the coolest thing in the world, going to the town. But the thing I observed was that people who never saw before, never knew before, all of a sudden people started working together because there was a crisis. And so my dad was he was antisocial. He was a sociable person, but all of a sudden he was like talking to people and working. I thought, Jesus, what happened to him? I never saw that person again until he got into his 70s, and all of a sudden he became Mr. Wonderful again, but during the early part of his life, he didn't really want to associate with other people, but he did during that period. And other people did. People were working together and they were doing things. They were helping people build their shops back up, and all of this stuff was going on. And that's a very common response to crisis. And it may be, and I hate to say this because I don't like it when other people say it, but it's rolling out of my mind right now. It may be that we need more crisis for people to actually respond, rather than rioting and burning things. And that's not a constructive response. But what is a constructive response? When people start saying, Jesus, we got to do something about this. And so part of the I guess message I feel that those of us who are macrobiotic, those of us who are vegans, those of us who are environmentalists, what we can do is we can become more active and become activists in spreading the message that there are things to be done, and we can do them. We can start now. Right? I know that sometimes people in macrobiotic circles have told me that I've become a little bit boring since I became a vegan because I keep talking to people about not eating animals. But you know, believe me, I'm aware of that. Right? I'm aware that a lot of people don't like it. Right? And there are many reasons why people don't like it. But one of them is that to me, that is framed in terms of, look, this is something you can do right now. You can do it now, and there is nothing else in your life, in your daily life, that you can do that has such a big impact. I'm not talking about eating junk vegan food, right? I'm not talking about becoming a vegan in word only. I'm talking about not eating animals of any kind. Just stop it, right? That's something we can do. And so there are many things that we can do like that, but there's nothing that is more impactful than that, right? And so, you know, I will continue to bore people with that message, you know, so be it. But if we don't take actual steps, we don't become good communicators of the message. And also, we lose the capacity to model the fact that you can be healthy and do good things for the environment. You can make ethical choices that work, and they are reflected in the way that you are. You know, so if people say to me, well, you know, and I've had people say this to me, they say, oh, you eat a vegan diet? And I say, well, yeah, I do, right? They say, oh, well, you don't look too bad. You know, that kind of response, you know, or you're not telling people to not, you know, they'll die if they eat meat, or, you know, they're murderers if they eat. That's not what it's about. It's about modeling what's there. And the macrobiotic community has an incredible opportunity here to do that, because we know how to cook. Other people don't know how to cook. We know how to cook. And cooking is the key, right? We know how to cook. We know how to eat within seasons. We know how to adjust food in terms of our own condition. There's a lot of things that we know about food which other people don't know. They're not common knowledge. And we know those things. So that's our gift, right? That we can give to other people. In fact, one of the reasons that Marlene is not on the call right now is twofold. One is because she's been worked off her mind. She's preparing food that are for people that are in lockdown. There's people who are in lockdown that aren't cooking, and so she's cooking food and delivering food to people. And the other thing is that she just finished today working on the contract to have her book published in Chinese. Right?
Wow.
Which is really cool, right? This is it'll be the first vegan Chinese cookbook, right? You know, and that's a bunch of people, right? That's 1 billion people out there, 1 billion or more than 1 billion people, you know. So she's been working on getting the book translated into Chinese, and also she's talking to people in India about getting the book translated. And if her book gets translated, then maybe I can sneak my book in behind in the slipstream. People are more interested in cooking than in psychology or philosophy. Okay, so
Bill, you've been terrific.
Thank you. It's
wonderful.
Really nice to see you all. And if you wish, you know, on our website, which is www.macrovegan.org, there is a shop, and in that shop there's lots of free stuff, right? There's recipes, and there's a few ebooks. There's mostly recipes and ebooks. There's also all of Marlene's videos are on there. Her interviews with people like Colin Campbell and other bigwigs in the nutritional world, which were made like 5 years ago, but they still stand up. and the videos that I do, and also on our YouTube channel. So thank you very much again. I wish you,
Thank you.
now, Ganat, can I get in on this link for any of the other presentations?